Mike Vrabel telling it like it is after the second day of joint practices with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Titans and Bucs play this weekend in preseason game number 2, and this is a very common dynamic now where teams get together a couple of days before they're due to play in the preseason and have those joint practices. And conversely, Bruce Arians, the Buccaneers coach, who was upset on Wednesday, he was happy on Thursday because, see, if one team sucks, that means the other team does well. It's even in a practice setting, a zero-sum game. There's a winner and a loser, Charean. But I like the joint practices. I think it does make sense to get guys going against someone other than the guys they see all the time who are supposedly their teammates that they're constantly pushing and shoving and yelling and screaming at. But you got to do it the right way. And as we're going to be discussing, far too often it doesn't happen the right way. Far too often it does boil over into something more than football practice.
Well, and, I started thinking, I never hear about the Patriots being in these fights. And so I Googled Patriots joint practice fight. Oh, no, they come up. There was nearly an all-out brawl a few years ago, 2016 against the Bears, and it comes up 2019. They had a fight. So they're involved in them, too. And I've never been, and I've probably been, I don't even venture to guess how many joint practices I've seen, 20, 25 in person. I've never seen one without a fight. They all fight every single time, and it gets so old. I mean, I think this is what they think they're supposed to do, and it's not. That's not the purpose of the practice. I remember a few years ago, the Cowboys and Rams went at it, and it was stopped early, and the Cowboys official told me, we're never having another joint practice with Jeff Fisher. His team, this is what they do. We're just not doing this again. And then, of course, you have these joint practices between the Cowboys and Rams, and what happened last week. They had another fight. So this is just what happens in these joint practices, and I hope they get something out of it, and they do, or they wouldn't keep doing them. But all we talk about after these practices are what? The fights.
Let's show those photos again. Antonio Brown was ejected briefly yesterday. He did come back after he cooled off. One-on-one drills with Chris Jackson, Titans corner. They got into it. Brown ripped the helmet of Chris Jackson off, and then, hey, I got to give him credit. You don't punch a guy with a helmet on. If you're going to punch a guy, get the helmet off first. Antonio Brown isn't going to break his hand, but you don't want to see those images. That's not what this is supposed to be about. And here's the irony, Charean, and I hope I'm using the word correctly. Thanks to Alanis Morissette, I never quite know if I am. What has been one of the stupid, goofy distractions this week for the NFL? It's been all this talk about the point of emphasis on taunting, and we have to show respect for our opponents, and we can't get in someone's face during a game. As far as I can tell, the NFL could give two craps about guys beating the hell out of each other at joint practices. How do you reconcile that one, 345 Park Avenue?
And that's exactly it, Mike. They know there are officials there, but they're not going to, they're not getting 15-yard penalties. Who cares? They might get kicked out of practice. For the veterans, hey, great, send me in the locker room. I don't care. It's one more practice I don't have to partake in training camp. So there is no recourse for this. And you heard Bruce Arians after they got finished saying, no, I'm not going to penalize guys for fighting. So what is the penalty for guys fighting? There's nothing. So that's why they fight. And this is what we would see if we didn't have officials in games and there wasn't a recourse. If there were no 15-yard penalties, if there were no fines in the regular season, in games, in preseason games, this is what we would see right here. We'd see fights the whole entire time because that's what they like doing.
And see, the fact that Bruce Arians won't discipline the guys who fought, including Antonio Brown, that tells me at some level they like it. At some level, they want it. As long as you don't punch a guy with a helmet on. Don't do anything stupid and get yourself injured. And I could hear Bruce Arians giving that instruction in my mind's ear with a lot of colorful language included. But don't do anything stupid like punch a guy with a helmet on, and otherwise you want to mix it up a little bit, so be it. But I've asked this question in the past to the league after I think there was a Raiders-Cowboys or Raiders-Ram incident where it almost spilled over into the crowd, if you remember that, several years ago.
Yeah, I was there.
And it was ugly and it was awful and it was right up against the snow fencing and you could see the players fighting and there's fans just inches away. It's like this is an alarming scene. And the league's position was then that this isn't our jurisdiction. This is between the teams to deal with these issues. Well, maybe it should be in your jurisdiction. And I asked that question last night to the league, and I didn't get a response. And here's how it goes. When they don't want to answer me, they don't respond, and they force me to ask again. So I've asked again because I want to get confirmation that this isn't something that triggers league responsibility. It should, and I guarantee you, if the league was handing out $20,000 fines for fighting during joint practices, there wouldn't be fights during joint practices, or at least there wouldn't be as many. There needs to be a real consequence in order to stop the behavior. And if there isn't going to be a consequence to stop the behavior, the message is we're fine with the behavior. And that's the message that we're all getting. So in the same week that we're hearing about you can't get in somebody's face and flex, it's okay to get in somebody's face and punch. That's the message that we've gotten this week.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Mike, I haven't heard of a joint practice that didn't have a fight. Maybe there was, but that's all we talk about when they have these joint practices is how they were stopped. Some of them were stopped early and, all the players came off the sideline. I mean, you can see it there. But every joint practice has some sort of physical altercation that shouldn't happen on a football field. This is not boxing. This is not fighting. This is football. And I know guys are fighting for jobs, and a lot of times it happens on special teams. And it's the guys at the bottom of the roster who are literally fighting for jobs who start some of those fights. But we also see it from big-name players. We saw it with Aaron Donald against the Cowboys last week. We saw it with AB, Antonio Brown yesterday. So it's also some big-name players who get in these fights. It's not necessarily all those bottom-feeder guys who are fighting for those positions. And it's hot and it's intense, and I get all that. But you have to remain under control. You're going to have to remain under control in a game, so remain under control in these joint practices when you need to get the work in and you need to get the reps. And it does nobody good when you stop these practices early.
The Rams-Cowboys fight this year did not surprise me because the Cowboys are the Hard Knocks team. And there are coaches out there, and I remember when Sean Payton did this, the year that the Texans got the Hard Knocks gig, the Saints and the Texans were supposed to have joint practices. Texans get the Hard Knocks assignment. Sean Payton says, sorry, I'm not subjecting my guys to this, because what happens is with the cameras there, that's when guys puff out their chests a little bit more. That's when they're more inclined to show off a little bit. That's when they feel like any act of disrespect must be met with a response because the cameras are watching. That's when the environment is even more conducive to a fight. But as we've seen just yesterday, you don't need to have Hard Knocks there for the temperature to increase to the point where you can have these fights. And unless and until you hear someone like Bruce Arians, the coach of the defending Super Bowl champions, say it's not acceptable. Not just there's a boys will be boys kind of a shrug that Arians had. And I think other coaches are the same way, except the coaches who are like Peyton, very aware of what can happen to one of your players if somebody is dumb enough to punch someone who's got a helmet on, or gets caught up in the bottom of a pile, or just gets injured some way, somehow by the punch that he takes to the face, like the Geno Smith thing, even though it was a teammate all those years ago. You don't want your guys throwing punches. You don't want your guys getting punched. But it's happening, which tells me at some level some of these coaches look at it as a net gain because it allows their players to prove that they're tough and they're willing to jump into the fray. And those qualities will come in handy when the going gets tough during football season. And I don't think that's the right approach. And because if it did, we'd see it at every practice. We'd see it at every joint practice. We'd see it at games. The hell with fines and suspensions and ejections. And I hope it's something that gets addressed, because it's really not the kind of stuff that you'll want. I'm trying not to be the old guy that's yelling at the cloud, right? I don't want that gif, old man yells at cloud, but it's not good for the game for this stuff to be happening. It's not good for us to be talking about.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.